the valley like a lonely voice searching for an answer. Snow swept over the mountains and drifted through the pine trees. The sky was gray and heavy. Winter had settled deep into the Wild West, covering the land in silence. On a small ranch at the edge of the valley, Clara Reed stood alone beside a wooden fence. The cold stung her cheeks. Her gloves were worn, her coat was patched in two places, yet she kept working. The fence had broken during the night and she was replacing a damaged board while snow gathered around her boots. Most people would have waited for better weather. Clara never waited for anyone or anything. If something needed doing, she did it herself. That was how she had lived for years. And that was how she planned to keep living. Still, as she hammered the final nail into place, her eyes drifted toward the distant road leading into town. The road was empty, no travelers, no wagons. No visitors, only snow. A strange sadness passed across her face before disappearing again. She looked away quickly. There was no reason to stare at an empty road. No one was coming, no one ever came. By late afternoon, the storm grew worse. The mountains vanished behind curtains of snow. The trees bent beneath the wind. Clara finished feeding the horses and hurried toward the cabin. The small wooden home sat alone among the pines. A thin trail of smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, the cabin felt warmer but no less quiet. She removed her coat and hung it near the door. The room held only the sounds she heard every day. The crackling fire, the ticking clock, the whisper of wind against the walls, nothing else, no conversation, no laughter. No footsteps besides her own. Clara moved through the familiar routine without thinking. She prepared supper, a simple bowl of stew, a piece of bread, a cup of coffee. Then she sat at the small table beside the window. Across from her stood an empty chair. She never used it, yet she never moved it either. The chair remained exactly where it had been for years. Waiting for someone who never returned, her eyes rested on it for only a second before she looked away. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Inside, the silence felt heavier than ever. After supper, Clara opened a drawer near the fireplace. Inside rested a small bundle of letters tied together with faded ribbon. She stared at them, her expression hardened. Without touching them, she closed the drawer again. Some memories were easier to keep buried. Others refused to stay buried no matter how hard she tried. A sudden crash outside broke the silence. Clara stood immediately, her heart jumped. The sound had come from the barn. She grabbed her lantern and hurried into the storm. Snow struck her face. The wind nearly stole her breath. As she reached the barn, she saw the problem. A large pine branch had snapped under the weight of snow. The branch had crashed through part of the roof. The horses inside were frightened. Clara quickly calmed them. "It's all right," she whispered. The animals slowly settled. She lifted the lantern higher and examined the damage. Her stomach sank. The roof was badly broken. More snow would enter during the night. She could repair a fence alone. She could mend tools alone. But this was too much for one person. For a moment, she simply stood there. The realization felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable, because it reminded her of something she hated admitting. Sometimes she needed help. The thought made her jaw tighten. She returned to the cabin and studied the storm outside her window. The nearest ranch was miles away. No one could reach her before morning, and she certainly wasn't about to ask. Clara had learned long ago that depending on others only led to disappointment. So she did what she always did. She made a plan. Tomorrow she would begin repairs herself. Tomorrow she would figure it out. Alone. Hours later, darkness covered the valley. The storm became even stronger. The cabin creaked beneath the wind. Clara lay awake in bed. Sleep refused to come. The sound of snow hitting the roof filled the room. Eventually she rose and looked through the window. The valley was nearly invisible. White snow swallowed everything. Then something caught her attention. A faint light, far away, moving through the storm. She frowned. At first she thought it was her imagination, but the light appeared again, a lantern. Someone was outside at this hour. In weather like this, the figure was too distant to recognize. The snow quickly hid the light once more. Clara waited. Nothing, only darkness, only wind. She remained at the window several moments longer. Who would be traveling in a storm like this, and why? The questions followed her back to bed. By morning, the storm had finally weakened. The valley glittered beneath fresh snow. Clara dressed quickly and stepped outside. The air felt sharp and clean. Her first thought was the damaged barn. She crossed the yard expecting to find even worse destruction. Instead, she stopped in disbelief. The broken section of roof had been covered, not repaired completely, but reinforced. Strong enough to keep snow out, strong enough to protect the horses. For several seconds she simply stared. Someone had worked through the storm. Someone had climbed onto the roof in the middle of the night. Someone had helped her, without asking, without taking credit, without leaving a note. Clara slowly walked around the barn. Fresh boot prints surrounded the building. The snow had preserved them perfectly. They led away from the ranch and disappeared into the forest. She followed them a short distance before stopping. The tracks told her nothing, only that the stranger had come alone. Her eyes narrowed. The mystery unsettled her more than the damage itself. Who would do this, and why? She looked toward the distant mountains. The valley stretched silent beneath the winter sun. No sign of a traveler, no sign of a neighbor, no sign of the person who had appeared during the storm. For the first time in years, something unexpected had entered Clara Reed's carefully controlled life, and she had a feeling it wasn't over. Far beyond the trees, unseen by Clara, a lone rider guided his horse along a snowy trail. He never looked back, but a faint smile crossed his face. The barn would hold until spring repairs could begin. That was enough. For now, Clara stood beside the mysterious footprints long after the morning sun rose higher above the valley. One question echoed through her mind. Who had come through the storm for her, and why did it feel like the answer might change everything? The mystery stayed with Clara for days. Every morning she noticed the repaired section of the barn roof. Every evening she found herself looking toward the forest. The unknown helper had become a question she could not answer. And Clara disliked unanswered questions. The storm passed, leaving clear skies and deep snow across the valley. Life returned to its usual rhythm. She fed the horses, chopped wood, checked fences, carried water, worked from sunrise until dusk. Yet the mystery remained. Someone had risked a winter storm to help her. No one in the valley was known for that kind of effort. At least no one she could think of. On Saturday morning, Clara hitched her wagon and traveled to town. The small frontier town sat between two hills, its wooden buildings dusted with snow. Smoke rose from chimneys, children ran through the streets, wagons rolled slowly over packed snow. The familiar sights should have felt comforting. Instead, Clara found herself watching faces. Wondering, looking for clues, she stopped first at the general store. The bell above the door rang softly as she entered. Warm air greeted her, so did the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Behind the counter stood Mary Collins. The widow smiled immediately. "Morning, Clara." "Morning." Mary began gathering supplies from Clara's list: flour, sugar, coffee beans, lamp oil. "The usual items. You look distracted," Mary observed. Clara shrugged. "I'm fine." Mary laughed quietly. "You always say that." Before Clara could reply, the door opened again. A blast of cold air entered the store. A tall man stepped inside. Snow covered the shoulders of his dark coat. He removed his hat. For a moment Clara barely looked at him, then Mary spoke. "Luke Carter, good timing." The man nodded politely. "Morning." His voice was calm and steady, not loud, not demanding, just simple. Clara glanced at him briefly. He appeared to be around her age. Broad shoulders, weathered face, clear gray eyes, the kind of man who spent most of his life outdoors. He wasn't smiling, but he didn't seem unfriendly either, just quiet, very quiet. Luke carried a sack of feed to the counter for an older rancher who appeared to be struggling. The older man thanked him. Luke merely nodded and returned to his own shopping. No speech. No attention-seeking, no expectation of praise. The action felt natural, almost automatic. For some reason, Clara noticed that. Mary leaned closer. "He's one of the good ones." Clara frowned. "I didn't ask." "No," Mary replied with amusement. "You never do." Clara paid for her supplies and prepared to leave. As she stepped outside, she found Luke loading lumber into a wagon. Strong lumber, fresh cut, the exact kind someone might use to reinforce a damaged roof. The thought appeared suddenly, she almost dismissed it, almost, then she noticed something else. The boot prints, his boots matched the size and shape she had seen around her barn. Her heart gave an unexpected jump. Before she could stop herself, she spoke. "Mr. Carter." Luke looked up. His expression remained calm. "Miss Reed." The fact that he knew her name surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't. Small towns rarely kept secrets. She hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something." "All right." No impatience, no curiosity, just patience. Clara studied him carefully. "During the storm last week, were you near my ranch?" For a second, silence lingered between them. Luke glanced toward the mountains, then back at her. "Yes." A simple answer, no excuses, no attempt to avoid the question. Clara crossed her arms. "Why?" Luke adjusted a rope securing the lumber. "I was checking livestock. During a blizzard, they still need checking." Clara couldn't argue with that. Many ranchers did the same, but that wasn't the question. "You fixed my barn." Luke nodded. A little," she repeated. "You kept my horses from freezing." "They would have been all right. No thanks to me." He met her eyes briefly. "You would have handled it." The certainty in his voice caught her off guard. As though he genuinely believed it, as though he wasn't trying to flatter her. Clara searched for hidden motives, found none. "Why help me?" Luke seemed surprised by the question. "The roof needed fixing?" "That's not an answer." He considered that, then shrugged. It was the right thing to do. The simplicity of the response irritated her. Mostly because she couldn't find fault with it. Many men talked about honor. Few climbed onto roofs during blizzards. Luke returned to securing his wagon. The conversation appeared finished in his mind. Clara waited. Surely he expected something, a favor, a repayment, an invitation, something. Instead, he simply continued working. Finally, she said, "Thank you." Luke looked up. A faint smile appeared, the first she had seen. "You're welcome." Then he climbed into his wagon. A moment later, he was gone, leaving Clara standing in the snow, more confused than before. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed occasionally, sometimes in town, sometimes along the trails, sometimes near neighboring grazing land. Each interaction followed a similar pattern. Luke never lingered unnecessarily, never pushed conversation, never asked personal questions. Yet somehow he always seemed willing to help. One afternoon, Clara discovered a broken wagon wheel several miles from home. Before she could solve the problem, Luke appeared on horseback. Without a word, he helped lift the wagon. Together they repaired the wheel. When the work was finished, he simply nodded and rode away. Another time, he delivered medicine from town after learning Clara's old sheepdog was sick. He left it on her porch. No note, no expectation of thanks. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Luke helped because help was needed, nothing more. At least that was how it seemed. One evening, while purchasing supplies, Clara found herself sitting near Mary Collins beside the stove. Snow drifted outside. The store felt warm, comfortable. Mary smiled knowingly. "You're thinking about him again," Clara sighed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Mary stirred her tea, then her expression softened. "Luke's been through hard times too." Clara looked up. "What kind of hard times?" Mary hesitated. "Those aren't my stories to tell." The answer only increased Clara's curiosity. Before she could ask more, the store door opened. Luke entered carrying a wooden crate. Ben Collins hurried over. "Thanks for bringing those supplies." Luke nodded. As he turned, his eyes briefly met Clara's. Neither spoke. Yet the silence felt different now, less distant, less guarded. Something had shifted, not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. As Luke prepared to leave, he paused near the stove. "There was something I meant to tell you." Clara looked at him. "What is it?" Luke adjusted his gloves. "I knew your father." Her breath caught slightly. Very few people spoke about her father anymore. "He never mentioned you." Luke nodded. "I was younger then." "What did you know about him?" For the first time, Luke smiled, a genuine smile. "Something I don't think he ever told you." Clara stared at him. "What?" Luke pulled on his coat. "I'll tell you next time." Then he walked out into the snow. The bell above the door rang softly behind him. Clara sat frozen beside the stove. Annoyance flashed across her face. Then curiosity, a curiosity stronger than any she had felt in years, because now the mystery wasn't just about Luke, it was about her father. And whatever secret Luke Carter seemed to know, for the next 3 days Clara thought about little else. Every time she stepped outside, she remembered Luke's words, "I knew your father." "Something I don't think he ever told you." The unfinished sentence followed her through every chore, while feeding horses, while chopping wood, while mending tack beside the fire. The curiosity became impossible to ignore, and much to her frustration, she found herself hoping to see Luke again. That realization bothered her more than the mystery itself. For years, she had carefully arranged her life around independence. Need no one, expect nothing, avoid disappointment. The rules had protected her. At least that was what she always told herself. Yet lately the cabin seemed quieter than before. The evenings felt longer. And sometimes, when she looked across the empty chair at her table, she found herself imagining conversation instead of silence. A week after their last meeting, Clara rode into town again. The morning sky was bright blue, fresh snow sparkled beneath sunlight, the mountains looked almost close enough to touch. As she secured her horse outside the general store, a familiar voice called out, "Miss Reed." She turned. Luke stood beside a wagon loaded with fence posts. A light breeze moved through his dark hair. For some reason, Clara felt unexpectedly relieved to see him. She immediately pretended otherwise. "You never answered my question." Luke looked amused. "Which one?" "The one about my father." "I remember." "Then answer it." Luke glanced toward the street. "Walk with me." Clara almost refused, almost. Instead, she followed him. They moved slowly through town. People greeted Luke as they passed. He acknowledged each person with a nod or a few quiet words, nothing forced, nothing performative, simply respectful. Eventually they reached the edge of town where the road overlooked the valley below. Luke stopped. The wind stirred softly around them. "What did you know about my father?" Clara asked. Luke rested his hands on the fence rail. "He helped me once." Clara frowned. "My father helped everyone." Luke nodded. "That's true." She waited. Luke continued. "I was 17. His gaze drifted toward the mountains. "My father died during a cattle drive." The words were simple, yet Clara sensed the weight behind them. "Afterward, things got difficult." He paused. "We nearly lost our ranch." Clara listened quietly. "Most people offered sympathy," Luke said. "Your father offered work." That surprised her. Luke smiled faintly. "He paid me fairly, taught me things, treated me like I mattered." Clara looked away. That sounded exactly like her father. Years later, Luke continued, "I asked him why he helped me. And," Luke's smile widened slightly, "he said something I've never forgotten." Clara folded her arms. "What?" Luke looked directly at her. "He said, when people are hurting, they don't always need advice. Sometimes they just need someone to stay." The words settled between them. For a moment, neither spoke. A memory stirred inside Clara, a distant image of her father sitting beside a campfire, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his laugh. She swallowed carefully. "I never heard him say that." Luke nodded. "I figured you hadn't." For the first time in years, Clara felt as though she had learned something new about the man she missed, something valuable. Something real. Unexpectedly, her eyes stung. She blinked the feeling away before Luke could notice, but of course he noticed. He simply pretended not to, and somehow that kindness mattered. As winter slowly moved toward spring, Clara and Luke began seeing each other more often. Not through planned visits, not through formal invitations, just life. The valley was small. Paths crossed naturally. One afternoon Luke helped repair a damaged fence line. Another day Clara assisted him in gathering cattle before a late snowstorm. The work felt easy together, comfortable. Conversation came gradually, neither rushed it. One evening they shared coffee outside Mary's store while waiting for heavy snowfall to pass. The town glowed beneath lantern light. Snow drifted quietly through the darkness. Ben Collins rushed past carrying supplies. Mary shook her head. "That boy never slows down." Luke smiled. "He reminds me of myself." Clara laughed softly. The sound surprised all three of them, including Clara. Luke glanced toward her. A hint of amusement appeared in his eyes. "You do laugh." she rolled her eyes. Rarely, I noticed. The exchange lasted only seconds, yet warmth lingered afterward, a warmth Clara hadn't felt in a very long time. A few weeks later, Luke arrived unexpectedly at her ranch. He wasn't carrying tools or supplies or feed, instead he held a small wooden box. Clara met him on the porch. "What's that?" Luke handed it to her. "I found it while clearing an old storage room." She opened the box carefully. Inside lay several worn photographs. Her breath caught. The top photograph showed her father, much younger. Standing beside a group of ranch hands, Luke stood among them, barely more than a teenager. Clara stared at the image. The sight felt like opening a forgotten door. There were more photographs beneath. Campfires, horses, cattle drives, ordinary moments frozen in time, moments she had never seen before. For several seconds she couldn't speak. Finally she whispered, "I didn't know these existed." Luke nodded. "I thought you should have them." No dramatic speech, no explanation, just quiet understanding. Clara looked down at the photographs again. Something shifted inside her. A small crack in a wall she had spent years building, not because of the photographs alone, but because Luke had recognized what they would mean to her, and because he had brought them without being asked, without expecting anything. The realization unsettled her in the best possible way. That evening Luke stayed for supper. The invitation surprised Clara almost as much as it surprised him. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table. The empty chair remained beside them. But somehow the room felt less lonely. Firelight flickered against the walls. Outside, the wind moved gently through the pines. For a while they talked about ranch work, weather, the valley. Simple things, then silence settled, not uncomfortable silence, peaceful silence, the kind that didn't require filling. Finally Clara looked toward the fire. "Can I ask you something?" Luke nodded. "Why aren't you married?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Luke seemed amused, straight to the difficult questions. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You don't have to answer, I don't mind." He leaned back slightly. "There was someone." Clara waited. Luke stared into the fire. "We planned a future together." A shadow crossed his face. "She became ill." Understanding came instantly. Clara lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Luke nodded once. "That was a long time ago, but it still hurt." "It did." The honesty of the answer struck her. No pretending, no hiding, no bitterness, just truth. For the first time, Clara realized Luke carried scars too, different scars, but scars nonetheless. And somehow that knowledge made him feel closer, more human, more real. Hours later, after Luke left, Clara stood on the porch watching him ride away beneath the stars. The valley was quiet, the night peaceful. She should have felt relieved to be alone again. Instead, she felt something else, a strange emptiness, as though part of the evening had departed with him. The realization frightened her because she knew exactly what it meant. Luke Carter was becoming important to her, far more important than he should have been, and for a woman who believed everyone eventually left, that was a dangerous feeling. Spring arrived slowly in the valley. Snow retreated from the hillsides. Streams began flowing again. Wildflowers appeared between patches of melting frost. The world seemed to be waking from a long sleep, but inside Clara Reed a different battle had begun. The closer she grew to Luke, the more restless she became. At first she tried to ignore it. She told herself their friendship meant nothing unusual. She told herself she was simply grateful, grateful for the help, grateful for the company, grateful for someone who understood silence. Yet every time she heard hoofbeats approaching her ranch, her heart reacted before her mind could. And every time Luke rode away, the cabin felt noticeably emptier. That frightened her. Because feelings led to hope, and hope led to disappointment. At least that was what experience had taught her. So Clara did what she always did when something felt dangerous. She pulled away. When Luke stopped by one afternoon to help repair a corral gate, Clara told him she was busy. When he invited her to ride into town for the spring market, she declined. When they crossed paths along a trail a few days later, she kept the conversation short. Luke noticed, of course he noticed, but he never questioned her, never demanded explanations. Never asked what had changed. That somehow made everything harder. One evening, Clara sat alone on her porch as sunset painted the mountains gold. The valley below looked peaceful, beautiful. Yet her chest felt tight. She hated this feeling, the confusion, the uncertainty, the fear. A horse approached from the road. She immediately recognized the rider, Luke. He stopped near the fence but didn't dismount. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved softly through the grass. Finally, Luke said, "You've been avoiding me." There was no accusation in his voice. Only observation. Clara stared toward the mountains. "I've been busy," Luke nodded. "All right." That was all. No argument, no challenge, just acceptance. The response irritated her. More than it should have. She turned toward him. "You're not going to ask why?" Luke studied her quietly. "If you wanted to tell me, you would." The simplicity of the answer left her with nowhere to hide. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Luke tipped his hat slightly. "Take care, Clara." Then he turned his horse and rode away. Clara watched him disappear down the road. An uncomfortable ache settled inside her. Because for the first time she realized something important. Luke respected her boundaries, even when those boundaries hurt him. Days passed, then weeks. The distance between them grew. Not because Luke stopped caring, but because Clara kept building walls, one after another. The old fears were returning. At night she found herself thinking about years ago, about promises. About plans, about the man who had once sworn he would never leave. The memory still hurt, not because she loved him anymore, but because of what his departure had taught her. People left. People changed, people disappointed you. The lesson had become part of her, like a scar beneath the skin. One rainy afternoon, Clara opened the drawer beside her fireplace. The drawer she rarely touched. Inside lay the bundle of letters, the same letters she had avoided for years. Slowly she untied the ribbon. Her hands trembled slightly. The final letter remained exactly as she remembered. The paper had yellowed with age, the words had not. She read only a few lines before stopping. It was enough to remember the heartbreak. Enough to remember the humiliation, enough to remember how abandoned she had felt. Tears filled her eyes, not for the man, for the version of herself who had trusted him completely. A soft knock suddenly interrupted her thoughts. Clara quickly wiped her eyes. When she opened the door, she found Mary Collins standing outside. Mary immediately noticed something was wrong. She said nothing, simply stepped inside. Sometimes kindness required silence. After a while they sat near the fire. The rain tapped gently against the windows. Finally Mary spoke. "Luke's worried about you." Clara looked away. "He shouldn't be." "Maybe." Mary stirred her tea. "That doesn't stop him." The words settled heavily. Clara stared into the flames. "I don't understand him." Mary smiled softly. "I think you do." "No, you do." Clara shook her head. Mary's expression became thoughtful. "You know why most people trust Luke." Clara remained silent. "Because he never asks people to become someone else." The older woman stood. "He accepts them where they are." Before leaving, Mary paused beside the door. "Not many people have that gift." Then she was gone, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts. A few days later, Clara found Luke repairing fencing near the edge of the valley. For several minutes she simply watched from horseback. He hadn't seen her. The afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the grass. Luke worked steadily, patiently, without complaint. The sight stirred something deep inside her, memories, moments, the repaired barn roof. The photographs, the medicine for her dog, the countless small acts of kindness. None of them had come with conditions, none of them had required repayment, and suddenly Clara understood something. Luke had never once asked her for anything, not affection, not attention, not promises, nothing. He had simply shown up, again and again, just as her father once had for others. The realization hit harder than she expected. She dismounted and walked toward him. Luke looked up. Surprise flashed briefly across his face, then disappeared. "Hello, Clara." She struggled to find words. For a moment neither spoke. The wind rustled through nearby grass. Finally she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Luke rested his hands on the fence post. "For what?" "I've been unfair." He studied her. "You've been afraid." The words landed with painful accuracy. Clara swallowed. For the first time she didn't look away. "I'm tired of being afraid." Silence followed, a long silence. Then Luke stepped closer, not too close, just enough. "What are you afraid of?" The question was gentle, patient, safe, and somehow that made answering harder. Because she could no longer hide behind anger or distance or pride, her eyes filled unexpectedly. "I loved someone once." Luke remained silent. "I trusted him," her voice cracked. "He promised he'd stay." The tears came despite her efforts. "And then he left." Years of pain seemed to pour from her all at once, the loneliness, the betrayal, the disappointment. Everything she had buried. Luke said nothing. He simply stood beside her, listening, present. When her voice finally faded, he quietly removed a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offered it. Nothing more, no speech, no advice, no attempt to fix her, just understanding. Clara accepted it, and in that moment something inside her began to heal. Several days later, news spread through the valley. Luke would be leaving for several weeks. A distant cattle purchase required his personal attention. The journey couldn't be avoided. Clara heard the news from Tom Harper. The words struck her harder than expected. For the rest of the day she felt distracted, uneasy. That evening she found herself standing outside her cabin watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold above the mountains. Everything looked beautiful. Yet all she could think about was one question. What if she waited too long? What if fear stole this chance too? Far down the valley road, Luke's ranch house sat beneath the fading light. And for the first time in years, Clara felt truly vulnerable, because Luke Carter was leaving, and she wasn't sure whether he knew how much he had come to mean to her. The realization followed her into the night, and long after darkness covered the valley, one painful thought remained. What if he came back, and everything between them had already been lost? The morning Luke left the valley, Clara watched from a distant hillside. He never saw her. She remained hidden among the pine trees while his horse carried him down the winding road. The sunlight was soft, the air carried the scent of spring, yet none of it felt beautiful. Not today. Luke disappeared around a bend in the trail, and suddenly the valley seemed larger than before. Quieter, emptier. Clara stayed there long after he was gone, listening to nothing but the wind. For years she had lived alone without complaint. Now a few weeks of absence felt unbearable. The realization unsettled her because it left her with a truth she could no longer deny. She loved him, not because he rescued her, not because he changed her life overnight. Not because he spoke beautiful words. She loved him because he stayed. Again and again, without asking for anything, without demanding trust, without trying to become a hero. He had simply shown up when she needed someone most, and somehow that had changed everything. The weeks passed slowly, longer than Clara expected. Every day she found herself noticing reminders of Luke. The repaired section of the old barn, the photographs he had given her, the fence they had rebuilt together. Even the trail leading toward his ranch. His absence seemed woven into every corner of her life. One evening she sat beside the fireplace studying the photographs again. Her father's face looked back at her from the faded images. For a long time she remained silent. Then her eyes settled on a photograph she had almost overlooked. Her father stood beside a younger Luke. Both were smiling. The image stirred a memory, not her own memory, Luke's story. When people are hurting, they don't always need advice. Sometimes they just need someone to stay. The words echoed through the room, and suddenly Clara understood something she had missed. For years she had focused on the man who left. She had allowed one painful experience to define every future possibility. But Luke was not that man. He never had been. She had been punishing someone else for a wound he never caused. The realization brought tears to her eyes, not tears of sadness, tears of clarity. For the first time in years, the weight she carried felt lighter. A month later, the valley began turning green. Wildflowers spread across the hillsides, the rivers ran fast with snowmelt. Life returned everywhere, except Luke. There was still no sign of him, though travelers occasionally brought news. The cattle purchase had taken longer than expected. Road conditions were poor. The return journey would be delayed. Each update felt both reassuring and frustrating. He was safe. But he was still gone. One afternoon, Clara rode into town. Mary noticed her immediately. "You've worn a path through this store waiting for news," Clara sighed. "I have not," Mary laughed. You have. For a moment they shared a smile, then Mary's expression softened. What will you do when he comes back? Clara looked down at her hands. A month ago she would have avoided the question. Today she answered honestly. I'm going to tell him the truth. Mary's eyes brightened. Good. The simple response made Clara laugh, a real laugh, the kind she once thought she had forgotten. 3 days later Luke returned. The news spread quickly through the valley. By sunset nearly everyone knew. Clara heard it from Ben Collins, who nearly ran into a fence while rushing to tell her. The moment he left, Clara stood completely still, her heart pounded. Fear returned briefly. Old habits whispered familiar warnings: protect yourself, stay safe, don't risk it. But those voices no longer felt as powerful as they once had, because another voice had grown stronger, a quieter voice, a braver one, the voice that said some things were worth risking, even love. The sun was setting when Clara reached Luke's ranch. Golden light covered the valley. The mountains glowed beneath the evening sky. For a moment she sat motionless on horseback. Then she dismounted and walked toward the house. Luke was repairing a gate near the barn. He looked up. Surprise crossed his face, then relief, and finally something deeper, something warm. For several seconds neither spoke. The silence felt familiar, comfortable, like coming home. Luke set down his tools. Hello, Clara, she smiled. Hello, he studied her carefully. You all right? Clara nodded, then shook her head. Luke looked concerned. That nearly made her laugh. Finally she took a slow breath. I missed you. The words hung in the evening air, simple. Honest. Luke's expression softened immediately. Something in his eyes changed. The distance between them seemed to disappear. I missed you too, he said quietly. Clara felt emotion rise in her chest. But this time she didn't run from it. I spent years believing everyone leaves. Luke remained silent, listening, the same way he always had. She continued. I thought keeping people at a distance would protect me. A small smile touched her lips. It turns out it was only making me lonely. The fading sunlight illuminated Luke's face. He said nothing. Yet somehow she felt completely understood. Clara stepped closer. I don't want to live that way anymore. The words carried years of fear, years of healing, years of hope. Luke looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled, not a large smile, not dramatic, just genuine, the kind that reached his eyes, and somehow it felt more meaningful than any speech. You don't have to, he said. The months that followed felt different from anything Clara had known before, not because life suddenly became perfect. There were still storms, still difficult seasons. Still long days of ranch work, but she no longer faced them alone. Together, she and Luke built something steady, something real, something earned. Trust grew where fear once lived. Laughter appeared where silence had ruled. Hope replaced old doubts, and slowly, without fanfare, love became part of everyday life. One autumn evening, nearly a year after the winter storm that had first brought Luke to her ranch, Clara sat beside a campfire overlooking the valley. The sky shimmered with stars. The air was cool and peaceful. Luke sat beside her, not speaking, not needing to. The fire crackled softly. Horses grazed nearby. Far below, lanterns glowed in the town. Clara rested her head gently against Luke's shoulder. For a long moment they simply watched the night, the mountains, the stars, the life they had built together. Finally Luke slipped his hand into hers, a small gesture, simple, steady, certain. Clara smiled. Years ago she had believed love always ended with someone walking away. Now she knew better. Because some people leave, but some people stay. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to trust again, the ones who stay can heal wounds you thought would last forever. Above them, the stars shone brightly across the western sky, and beneath that endless blanket of light, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in many years: peace, a quiet, lasting peace. The kind that comes from finally finding home in another person's heart.